was a country music legend who died tragically young, leaving behind two very young children. One of them grew up to become a country superstar himself, while the other never even knew her famous father until decades later. Their journeys couldn't be more different, and their stories are filled with heartbreak, resilience, and the enduring power of family legacy. Number 2. Hank Williams Jr. was born in 1949 as the only son of Hank Williams Sr. and his wife Audrey. He was nicknamed Bocephus by his dad, but sadly, little Hank Jr. was only 3 years old when his father died on New Year's Day, 1953. Imagine being a toddler, and suddenly the entire world knows your dad's songs by heart, but you're too young to understand why he's gone. Hank Sr.'s unexpected death, in the back seat of a Cadillac at age 29, meant his son would grow up in the shadow of a legend. Under the guidance of his mother Audrey, Hank Jr. started performing almost as soon as he could hold a guitar. In fact, he stepped on stage at just 8 years old to sing his father's songs. By age 11, he was performing at the Grand Ole Opry, and by 14, he'd appeared on national TV shows like The Ed Sullivan Show, singing carbon copies of Hank Sr.'s hits. The pressure on the young Hank Jr. was immense. Audiences expected him to be his father. He even released an album of his dad's songs as a teenager. By the time he was 20, Hank Jr. had recorded 21 albums and scored 11 top 40 country hits, all while basically impersonating his late father's style. It's as if his whole childhood and teens were spent paying tribute to a man he barely remembered. But privately, this legacy was a heavy burden. Hank Jr. struggled to find his own voice. He later admitted he became disillusioned with being a Hank Williams impersonator. In the early 1970s, he began to rebel against the mold. He severed ties with his mother's management and moved from Nashville to rural Alabama in 1974 to escape the spotlight and reset his life. He formed a rock-influenced band and started hanging out with Southern rock musicians like Waylon Jennings and Charlie Daniels, determined to forge a new musical identity. "I'd be making my music, not Daddy's," he wrote, describing his need to break free from impossible expectations. Then came the biggest challenge of Hank Jr.'s life. On August 8, 1975, at the age of 26, Hank Williams Jr. was hiking along the rugged Ajax Peak in Montana. When the snow beneath him collapsed, he plummeted over 500 feet down the side of the mountain. The fall was catastrophic. He smashed face first into rocks, suffering multiple skull and facial fractures. He was so badly injured that he nearly died right there on the mountain. Miraculously, Hank Jr. survived, but he spent the next 2 years recovering, including 17 surgeries to rebuild his face. He had to relearn how to talk and sing during his long recovery. To cover the scars, Hank Jr. grew a full beard, put on dark sunglasses, and donned a cowboy hat, a look that would become his signature image in the years to come. That near-fatal accident became a turning point. Hank Jr. often says that fall gave him a new life. When he returned to music, he did it entirely on his own terms. In 1975, even as he lay in a hospital bed, the album Hank Williams Jr. and Friends was released. It was his first project that truly mixed country with rock and blues, showing the world Hank Jr.'s own style. Some of the Nashville old-timers didn't like this new sound, but a new generation of fans loved it. Hank Jr. had finally stepped out of his father's shadow, freed from the obligation to be a copy of Hank Sr. Hank Williams Jr. went on an incredible run in the late 1970s and 1980s. He blended Southern rock attitude with country tradition, singing about raising hell, having a good time, and being proud of his roots. Song by song, album by album, he built a name for himself, not just as Hank's son, but as Bocephus, a country superstar in his own right. Chart success. Between 1979 and 1990, Hank Jr. released a staggering number of hits, over 30 top 10 singles on the country charts, with at least 10 of those reaching number 1. He was releasing albums, sometimes 2 in 1 year, and 21 of his albums went gold over his career, an almost unheard-of accomplishment that solidified his place in country music history. Accolades. In the late 1980s, Hank Jr.'s peers honored him as well. He was named Entertainer of the Year multiple times by both the Country Music Association and the Academy of Country Music, a sign that Nashville had fully accepted that Hank Jr. wasn't just writing on his father's name. He had earned his own legendary status, pop culture icon. By 1989, even football fans who never listened to country knew Hank Jr.'s voice. His revved-up anthem, "All My Rowdy Friends Are Coming Over Tonight," was adapted into the opening theme for Monday Night Football, and it became hugely popular. In fact, his rowdy Monday Night Football theme earned him 4 Emmy Awards in the early 1990s, proving Hank Jr. had gone truly mainstream. Despite all the success, Hank Jr. never forgot the trials he overcame. He poured those experiences into songs like "A Country Boy Can Survive," an anthem about resilience that fans embraced. In 2020, after over 5 decades in music, Hank Williams Jr. was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, a fitting recognition of a career that had soared to heights even his legendary father never lived to see. Today, in his mid-70s, Hank Jr. remains a towering figure in country music, a man who nearly lost everything on that Montana mountain, but climbed back to the top on his own terms. Yet, while the world watched Hank Jr.'s very public journey, there was another Williams child whose story was unfolding in the shadows. Number 1. Jet Williams. Jet Williams' birth was the result of a brief relationship between Hank Sr. and a woman named Bobby Jett in 1952. Hank knew about the pregnancy and, remarkably, had prepared to take responsibility for the baby. In fact, Hank Williams signed papers before Jet was born, stating he would take full custody of his unborn daughter and provide for her upbringing. It's heartbreaking to think that Hank Sr. was planning a future with his baby girl. He arranged to pay the mother's medical bills and intended to raise the child himself, but fate intervened when he died on January 1st, 1953. Jet was born on January 6, 1953 in Montgomery, Alabama. At first, her paternal grandmother, Lillian Williams, Hank Sr.'s mother, took the infant in and even legally adopted her. The baby's legal name at that point was Kathy Yvonne Williams, though she would go through many names in the years ahead. Tragically, Hank's mother passed away when the little girl was only 2 years old. What happened next sounds like something out of a Dickens novel. Hank Sr.'s sister, Irene, was supposed to care for her niece after Grandma died, but instead, Irene gave the toddler up to foster care and even went to court to cut the child off from any inheritance from the Williams family. In other words, the relatives knew this little girl was Hank Williams' daughter, but they did not want to acknowledge her, possibly to keep Hank's estate and royalties for themselves. Thus, Jet grew up not knowing who her father was. She was shuffled through a series of caretakers and adopted by another family. "I had 4 families before I was 4, was orphaned 3 times, and had 6 name changes," Jet later recalled of her chaotic early childhood. For the first 21 years of her life, Jet Williams had no idea that she was the daughter of a country music icon. She was raised under a different name, Kathy Dupree, after her final adoption, and had a completely ordinary life, unaware of her true parentage. The truth of Jet's heritage began to unravel in the mid-1970s. When Jet turned 21, her adoptive parents handed her a small pile of papers and $2,000 that had been held in trust for her by Hank Williams' mother, Lillian. They hinted that her biological father might have been someone important, but provided few details. This mysterious clue lit a fire in Jet. She became obsessed with finding out who her father was. Imagine being told out of the blue that you might be country music royalty, and then being told there's no proof. Jet couldn't let it go. She started digging through old records, asking questions, and tracking down anyone who might know about her birth. It wasn't easy. Many doors slammed in her face. For years, she hit one brick wall after another. In the late 1970s, Jet managed to get in touch with some of Hank Williams' relatives. Some were hostile or dismissive, but a cousin of Hank's gave Jet a crucial piece of information: the name of a lawyer who had once worked on her case. Finally, in the early 1980s, Jet teamed up with a Washington attorney named Keith Atkinson, who believed her story and was determined to help. Their partnership would become personal. The two eventually fell in love and married in 1986. With Atkinson's help, Jet uncovered a bombshell. A copy of the pre-birth custody agreement Hank Williams Sr. had signed in 1952, declaring that he intended to take full custody of the child Bobby Jet was carrying. This document was like a golden ticket. It proved Hank acknowledged Jet as his child before she was even born. Jet was elated to learn, as she put it, "My daddy loved me enough to do something just for me. He never meant for her to be given away. I wasn't born adopted. My father never intended for me to be adopted. He just didn't count on dying," Jet said poignantly. Armed with evidence, Jet Williams went to court to claim her identity and her inheritance. But the battle was anything but simple. Hank Williams Jr., who by then controlled his father's estate, refused to acknowledge Jet as his half-sister for many years. In fact, the legal fight over Hank Sr.'s legacy dragged on for 9 long years. Jet's case wound through probate court, state circuit court, the Alabama Supreme Court, even federal courts. It was appealed and retried so many times that aspects of it went before the U.S. Supreme Court 5 times. The core issues were proving that Jet was indeed Hank's biological daughter, which the paperwork and DNA tests eventually supported, and whether an adopted child had the right to share in a birth parent's estate. The odds were against her at first. The powerful interests wanted to keep Hank Williams' lucrative song royalties in the hands of the existing estate, but Jet and her knight in a 3-piece suit, as she called attorney Atkinson, persisted. In 1985, victory came. An Alabama court legally declared Jet Williams to be the daughter of Hank Williams Sr., and therefore entitled to her half of Hank's estate. She had proven not only her paternity, but also that certain family members had deliberately concealed her existence for their own financial gain. It was an extraordinary historic case that even led to changes in Alabama law regarding inheritance rights of children born out of wedlock or adopted. Suddenly, Jet Williams went from a footnote to a recognized heir of a music legend. She was now legally Jet Williams, a name she chose for herself, combining her birth mother's last name with her father's. But reclaiming her identity wasn't just about money or a name. It was deeply personal. Jet had spent decades yearning to know her father. Now that the world knew who she was, she set out to connect with Hank Sr. in the only way she could, through his music. After winning her case, Jet Williams found that music was a natural bridge to the father she never met. In the late 1980s, in her mid-30s, she bravely stepped onto the stage herself. Jet began performing professionally in 1989, singing some of her father's classic songs like Your Cheatin' Heart, alongside her own original material. In 1993, she even stood on the hallowed stage of the Grand Ole Opry, the same institution where her father and brother had performed, and made her debut there. For over a decade, Jet toured and kept Hank Sr.'s legacy alive for new generations of fans, often inviting some of Hank's old band members to play with her on stage for an authentic touch. She also published an autobiography in 1990 titled Ain't Nothing as Sweet as My Baby, detailing her incredible life story. There's an undeniably bitter-sweet element to Jet's journey. She has said, "I'm never going to have memories of Christmas with my father or of sitting in his lap. but I still feel I know him. She often describes listening to Hank Sr.'s recordings and feeling as if he is singing just to her. In many ways, music became Jet's way to commune with the dad she didn't get to know in life. She even believes that Hank Sr. has watched over her like a guardian angel, guiding her steps as she fought for her identity. And what about the relationship between Hank Williams Jr. and Jet Williams, those two children separated by circumstance? For years, it was strained to say the least, but time heals many wounds. In 1987, the courts finally settled the estate dispute in Jet's favor. It still took time for emotions to settle. Then, in 1998, something remarkable happened. On what would have been Hank Sr.'s 75th birthday, Jet and Hank Jr. met and reconciled. After decades of legal battles and hard feelings, the brother and sister at last came together, united by the memory of the father they both lost. I believe my daddy was finally at peace, knowing his kids were no longer fighting, Jet said of that reunion. It was a closure Hank Williams Sr. never got in life, but perhaps he smiled down from above to see his son and daughter join hands as family.